Hey everyone, how's everyone doing? Good, thanks for coming. So we are here to talk to you all about continuous delivery to AWS with GitHub Actions. My name is Steve Winton. I am a partner engineer with GitHub, which basically means that I get to do lots of cool and interesting work with our partners. We've been working recently with AWS, and so we're going to show some of that today. I'm really excited to show you, but first I want to introduce my colleague, John.
Hey everybody, I'm John. I'm also on partner engineering with Steve, and we're excited to show you what we've learned about GitHub Actions and AWS today.
Cool. So here's our agenda for today. Introduction is what you just heard. And then we're going to kind of unpack GitHub Actions. So John is going to talk us through what GitHub Actions is, the kinds of problems it solves, how you can get started, some of the resources that are already out there. And then I'm going to take over and do a couple of demos for us. We'll first of all look at a real-world deployment scenario. So we've got an application that we'll deploy to AWS using GitHub Actions. And then we want to add on another short demo where we kind of look at other automation possibilities using GitHub Actions. So it's not just a CI/CD tool, as you'll see. Then we'll wrap it up, and we should be done here in probably about the next 50, 55 minutes, I think, if all goes well. So I'm going to hand it over to John now, and yeah, thanks.
Awesome. Thanks, Steve. So if you don't know much about GitHub Actions yet, this can serve as a quick introduction. GitHub Actions is GitHub's built-in software automation platform, and it's scriptable. It's now out of beta and free to begin with on github.com. So a lot of people know this as GitHub's new CI/CD tool. It offers matrix builds across many operating systems, a built-in secret store, and artifact caching. But as Steve will show you in a few minutes, it's that and a lot more. So how do you get started? It's pretty simple. You just head to the Actions tab of one of your repositories. You'll see a screen where you can pick from open source starter workflows, and this page will even suggest to you starter workflows based on the language contents of the repo. When you find one you like, you'll be taken to an editor with nice features like syntax highlighting, autocomplete, and a sidebar showing you documentation. In that same sidebar, you can browse for new actions in the GitHub Marketplace to use in your workflow, like the AWS actions we're going to use today. You'll notice this is actually just a YAML file in a special folder where GitHub knows to look for workflows, .github/workflows. Also notice we're taking advantage of GitHub's secret store to grab the credentials we need to authenticate. These secrets are entered in a repository settings, fully encrypted, and then made available to workflows. As soon as everything looks good and you press commit, this workflow will be live and ready to react to the events that you set up. So let's go over some terminology. You'll hear workflows. Workflows start with a trigger, like a push, and they contain at least one job with at least one step. Jobs run in parallel on different virtual machine runners, and steps run in sequence on the same runner. So out of the box, we give you Linux, Mac, and Windows hosted runners. But now in the self-hosted runners beta, you can bring your own hardware. If you want to test your code against ARM processor architecture, you can do that. In this code screenshot to the right, on push to any branch, we grab an Ubuntu VM, check out our JavaScript application code, install its dependencies, build it, and test it. So not all of the details are important here, but notice the line starting with uses, I think that's 16, and the one starting with run, lower in the file. Uses pulls in an action, which we'll go over in a moment. And run is how you enter shell commands, either in Bash, PowerShell, or Python. So many workflows will use both uses and run steps. You might also use workflows for other tasks in your organization, like one that welcomes new contributors upon their first pull request, or one that scans project metadata, like the license or code of conduct, whatever else. The next piece of terminology is the event. We mentioned that a couple of times. This is the trigger that makes your workflow run. There's something like 25 events across GitHub that you can trigger workflows on, like pushing, like creating an issue, labeling, making a repository public, etc. You can also run a workflow on a schedule. So my team at GitHub is distributed, and we use GitHub to collaborate. So every Monday at noon, we use this workflow, pictured to the right, to create a new issue, pinging everyone on the team to ask for a status update. And then finally, if I'm the developer of a GitHub app, which is a special type of integration that we'd love to tell you about afterwards, I can trigger an external event called a repository dispatch event to say, for example, okay, machine learning model test complete, result is this. There's a payload you can send in. Actions. Remember the keyword uses from before? So that references a repository or container, and it's a unit of work for your workflow. It's an action. You can pass inputs, you get back outputs, and chain them together elegantly to build composable workflows. For a repository to be an action, it needs another YAML file with a special name called action.yaml and some code to do the logic. Actions are run in Node or Docker runtimes, which means you can use any language. There's some best practices around developing open source actions, so if you're interested, feel free to grab us afterwards. GitHub Actions would not be possible without all of you, without the open source ecosystem of users and developers. You can check out github.com/actions for some starter workflows and a few open source actions, as well as the GitHub Marketplace, where you can find more actions written by the community. We use a couple from Amazon in this next section of the talk. Back in github.com/actions, there's also an open source Node.js toolkit that helps you build actions, for example, making API calls to GitHub using inputs and outputs. And finally, I just want to mention that this is completely free to start, and per-minute pricing is available if you want to go up and above. So now that you know what GitHub Actions is, I'm going to hand it over to Steve to show you how it's used in continuous delivery and deployment scenarios and beyond.
Cool. All right. Could we switch to the demo, please, James? Awesome. All right, so we're going to look at a couple of demos. And yeah, it's going to be good. We're going to start off with a real-world deployment scenario. But first of all, by way of a quick introduction to the application that we'll be deploying today, I wanted to introduce you all to the Octocat, also known as Mona Lisa. She's our company mascot. She's a half cat, half octopus, of course. Some of you may already know of her, and here is her profile page on github.com. She has almost 3,000 followers, which makes her one of the most popular people to follow on GitHub. So in honor of Mona Lisa, our Octocat, we have developed an application not called Octocat, but called Octochat, or if you're French, you might say Octochat. And this is an application that allows you to privately message with your GitHub followers. I should mention this is a demo application. It is live, it is in production, but please don't use it. We'll probably destroy it after this. But it is real code and it's open source. And we are fully contained. We're running in a container here. So for reference, here's our Docker file. You can see it's running an Express server using Node. And yeah, I love this approach, like this containerized approach, because it means that the artifacts, the environment that I'm using in my development environment is exactly the same artifact that ends up in production. So I love that kind of consistency that it gives us. I wanted to also talk a little bit about the architecture that we are deploying to on AWS. So kind of the guts of the system here that we'll be deploying to is ECS. That's Amazon Elastic Container Service. It's a thing that's scheduling our containers for us in the cloud. And then that is sitting behind an application load balancer, which is internet-facing, so our clients can connect to our application through that secure connection, which is then load balanced across our cluster. We are using DynamoDB to persist our data, which DynamoDB is a NoSQL data store. And we have a Lambda layer, which originally, so we were going to build an API alongside this as well. That may come in version 2, and Lambda was going to be then available outside the cluster for the API gateway. But right now, it's just handling the business logic between the ECS cluster and DynamoDB. There are a couple of other things as well that we're using. They're just not on this diagram. CloudWatch and Elastic Container Registry. This is kind of the guts of the system that we're going to be dealing with today. So here is the live app, which you may have already pulled up on your phone. It's running at octochat.dev. You can log in with your GitHub account. It's going to authorize you using OAuth. So I've already authorized this app. I'm just going to seamlessly log in now. And then once you are logged in, you get this really neat messaging capability. So here's my inbox, and John has kindly sent me a message. And it's a nice message of encouragement. Hey, good luck with the demo. Hope it goes well. And I hope so too. So I'm going to send John a quick reply here, if I can find him. And I'm just going to type, thanks, John. Yeah, me too. And I'm going to send that to John, so he'll get my message. And once that's sent, you can toggle over to your sent messages. And there's my message that I just sent. So yeah, it's a pretty simple application. Allows you to privately message with your GitHub followers. It's running on AWS Cloud. So what I'd like to do, though, is in order for us to kind of move fast and change things, I'd want to add some continuous integration to this repo using GitHub Actions. Continuous integration, or CI, will allow us to use like a modern branch-based workflow, leveraging pull requests for feedback on our works in progress, and we can use actions to kind of automate our checks, our static analyses, our unit tests, and our builds, so that we can be confident in our changes before we merge our branches and before we push them off to production. So we're going to show you a nice workflow now that will enable that and will basically allow us to increase our productivity and move fast and move at scale. So here's the repo. What I need to do is navigate over to the Actions tab. And I'm on the Actions tab. I haven't set up a workflow yet in this repository. So this is like the brand new first-time experience. And when I land on this page, GitHub has already looked at my code, has seen that I've got a JavaScript repository, and so is helpfully recommending a couple of starter workflows for me to get set up with. So I could also just do my own thing and go my own way, but I feel a bit more confident doing what GitHub recommends. So I'm going to just set up the node.js build and test a node project with NPM. So let's set up that workflow. And this is the workflow that's now pre-populated for us. And it's like 90% of the way there, but I do need to make some edits so that it fits my application kind of use case. First thing I want to do is just rename this. So I'm gonna give this a new name. We'll call it build, and I'll just rename the file to match. So we'll call that build.yaml. And I want my changes to run in response to every pull request that is open. So I'm going to say on pull request. And then I'm going to rename my job. I'm going to actually have a separate build job in a second. So I'll name my job test. And we've got this strategy section here. The strategy section is really cool. It allows us to run a matrix build, which means in this instance, we can run our tests across these 3 versions of Node. So we've got version 8, version 10, and version 12. So all of my unit tests will get checked against those 3 versions of Node. And then we kind of come down to the steps section here, and I've got an npm install, build, and test that GitHub has recommended. I don't need the build, but I would like to lint my code. So I'm going to remove that build step right after I've installed my dependencies for CI. So let's change that to lint. And another thing that I think would be nice to add is like an npm audit, just to make sure that I'm not introducing any known security vulnerabilities into my code base. And I'm going to set the CI environment variable to true. The other kind of oddity of my application is that it's actually in a subdirectory of my repo, so I just need to specify this working directory so that npm can find my package.json and so on when it runs. So that is the test workflow. It's going to fan out across 3 versions of Node. And what I'd also like to do, I mentioned this was a contained application. So what I would also like to do is add a second job that will run and build our container image. So I'm going to call this one build. And this is a really nice feature where you can set up like dependencies between your jobs. So I'm going to say build needs test. So if my tests fail, I won't bother running builds, but if my tests pass, I'll go on and build it as well. And in this case, I'm going to say it can run on Ubuntu latest. That's fine. And I'm going to add a couple of steps here. The first one is this kind of pre-baked actions/checkout action that is provided by GitHub. And that's just going to download a copy of my repository, and it's going to check out in this case, the merge commit, so that my build will run against that merge commit on the pull request. So I'll say uses action/checkout to get my code. And then the next step I need to do is literally just to run the build. So I'm going to give this one a name. I'm just going to call it build Docker image, which works for me. And this one also needs, I think it would be nice to have an environment variable. It just feels a little bit cleaner. So I'm going to specify kind of a dynamic environment variable. And I'm going to create an image tag environment variable. And I'm going to dynamically set that to the current SHA of the commit that's being built. So I can access that through this GitHub context. So that means this image tag environment variable is dynamically available to this step. And then I'm going to just specify the run command here, which is just a straightforward Docker build. So I'm going to Docker build, and I'm going to tag, just because that just feels like the right thing to do. I'm going to tag it with not only that image tag, but also with my GitHub repository. So this is an environment variable GitHub repository that is always available through the actions kind of runtime. And then I'm going to include my image tag as well. So this is our kind of initial kind of build CI workflow in response to every pull request. I think I'm feeling pretty good about this, so I'm going to go ahead and commit this. I'll just give it a commit message of just setup CI, and I want to create a new branch for this. So I'll call the branch setup CI, and we're going to propose this change. So let's submit this as a pull request. And as well as, so this is actually going to run my tests. I'm going to assign myself as kind of the owner of this pull request. And I would also like to get another person on my team to review this for me. So I'm going to ask that John would review this. OK, and there's just one more thing I would like to add to this. So I'm going to just navigate to my setup CI branch. So now I'm on my branch. I'm going to just scroll down to my README. And what I would like to do is to display on my README what the build status is of this repo, so that anyone who happens upon it can see that hopefully the builds are passing and feels confident in using this work. So I'm just going to paste in this kind of pre-baked HTML snippet where it's essentially going to pull in a dynamically generated SVG that is pointing at my build workflow, and then the badge for my build workflow, and that SVG will render as an image on my README and will display the current build status, which if we're lucky today, that will be green. So I'm going to commit this change as well to my setup CI branch. So I'm just going to say add build status to README and commit that change. So we can see currently the build has no status because we're setting this up for the first time. OK, so let's go back now to our Actions tab, and we see we already have a couple of builds running. So these are the first ever builds on this repository. And as I mentioned, we can see that it is running across 3 versions of Node, version 8, 10, and 12. And those are all running concurrently, so we should get feedback pretty quickly. And let's just wait here for a moment for these 3 concurrent tests to complete. So we're going to install our dependencies. We're going to lint. We're also doing that audit step, which is nice, gives me kind of some confidence in the security of my release. And then we're going to run our unit tests. OK, cool. So those have all completed. And if you might have seen there, at the end there, our build got kicked off too. So let's jump down to the build. And this is now going to build our Docker image for us. And I know everyone's time is valuable, so I'm going to suspend the constraints of time and space for a moment, and we're going to speed this up. All right, this looks good, I think. So we've got lots of green check marks now. So the build is successful, and let's jump back to our pull request and see what's going on over there. So what I mentioned, what I'd really like as well is to have a team member also review this work for me, so I'm not just flying solo, and a team member has helpfully approved this for me, so I've got all of my checks passing. I've got an approval from a team member, feeling really good about this addition, this CI addition, so I'm going to merge this in. And let's just navigate now back to the repo homepage. So we're looking at the master branch here. And we can see the new workflows folder where our CI has been set up, and we've got our badge now that is saying the builds are passing. So yeah, I feel really good about this change. We've set up a CI workflow in our GitHub repository, and it was pretty straightforward. Just bear with me a sec. So the other piece of this then, now that we have this kind of nice continuous integration workflow set up, I really want to set up a continuous delivery and continuous deployment workflow as well that will allow us to continually deliver this application to the AWS cloud. And just a quick note on the terminology that I'm using here. So by continuous delivery, what I mean is that we're continually delivering an artifact that represents a release of our application to the cloud, and that artifact can then be used for deployment. And then the continuous deployment, what I mean by that is we're taking that delivered artifact and actually releasing it to deploying it to the cloud. In this case, the artifact is our Docker image. So I am going to go ahead and set up a CD workflow. And there's some good news here, because fortunately, AWS has kindly released a set of actions in this AWS Actions org that we can leverage. We don't have to reinvent the wheel and do everything from scratch here. So there's a set of actions here that I can use. These are kind of like the building blocks that we'll piece together to form our CD pipeline, and that will become a cohesive whole through these building blocks. The same actions are also available on GitHub Marketplace. That's github.com/marketplace. And as well as these AWS actions, there are a lot of community-contributed actions as well. On this page, there's a snippet of YAML. It's just a question of copying that snippet of YAML and pasting it into your workflow file. But today, we can actually go even one step better than this. So back in our OctoChat repo, we can use another template. So I'm on the Actions tab here. I have my one workflow build set up. But if I scroll down a little bit, we can see that there's this handy deploy to Amazon ECS starter workflow, which this gives us a nice starter template to get up and running, and that will leverage those official AWS actions as well. So I am going to set up this workflow. And again, I just need to make a few changes to the template that's suggested for me. So first thing I want to do is rename this workflow. I want to make this, I want to name this deploy.yaml. So that feels kind of a nice symmetry with my build.yaml file. And you can see there are some comments at the top of this template just to guide you through the process. The default here is to do a deployment on every push to the master branch. So I feel pretty good about that being the default. And I feel pretty good about we're running on Ubuntu latest, so I'm not going to change that. We need to check out the code. That makes sense. I don't need to change that. But then when we come down to the configuration of our AWS kind of credentials in the environment, I do need to change the AWS region. I'm actually running in EU West 1. So I'm going to make that change. And I need to log in. I mentioned we were using Amazon ECR, the Elastic Container Registry, and I need to log into ECR. And yeah, once I'm logged into Amazon ECR, I need to push my image to ECR. So I need to tag my image a certain way, and I need to tell it which repository I'm using on ECR. So my repository is called OctoChat. And the image tag I'm fine with. And then this all looks good. I'm just going to Docker build and push it to ECR. And then before I update ECS, I need to dynamically render the task definition that lives in this repository. And the task definition is in a slightly different path from what's provided in the template, so let's just correct that. It's living in a folder called .aws, so let's just make that change. .aws/task definition, and within my task definition, my container is also called OctoChat. So let's make that change as well. Okay, one last edit to this template, and I think we're good. So the last thing that we've done after we've pushed our container and updated our task definition is to actually deploy it to ECS. Again, we've got a pre-baked action here that will do that for us. We need to edit the service that we are deploying to. My service is called OctoChat-ALB, ALB standing for Application Load Balancer. And then my cluster, I need to rename that as well. Not default, but you guessed it, it's OctoChat. And then there's a little snippet at the end there that just says wait for services to stabilize, which is nice. It means that the workflow won't complete until everything in my cluster is stable. So here's our set of changes. I'm going to commit this. And because you only live once, I am going to commit this one directly to master. So here we go. So here are my two workflows now on master. I've got a build workflow and a deploy workflow. Yeah, so looking pretty good so far. Let's jump back to our Actions tab, and let's see this running. So it's already running for us, deploy to Amazon ECS, and let's see how we do. Okay, so we got a failure, which maybe isn't a great start. Let's have a look and see what's going on. So I think the issue here is we didn't send in any credentials for Actions to be able to authenticate with AWS. So I need to go and fix that. And the way we do that is through secrets, which are available as a setting in your repository. So let's jump into the secrets section here. And John mentioned this already, but secrets are essentially environment variables that are encrypted and stored with your repository. When you save a secret, you can't read it again. There's no API on this interface. They're only available to workflows or steps in a workflow that request that secret, which obviously you would be in control of that. So yeah, they're a secure way of storing secrets, and in our case, we need to store our AWS credentials so that GitHub can deploy to AWS for us. So there are two secrets that we need to add here. The AWS Access Key ID, and I'm just going to paste this in. This isn't a valid one, don't worry. And I'm going to also, yeah, as I said, you can only remove it. You can't read it once it's in there. And I'm also going to add my AWS secret access key. I'm going to paste that in as well. That one is real. No, it's not real. I'm joking. It's just a demo. So now this is configured. Our CI and CD pipeline is configured. We've given it the secrets to our AWS account. And so this should all be good. All right, should we take another look? So let's try this out. And it looks like there is a pull request that someone has mysteriously opened. And it looks like it requires our attention. So John has been busy whilst I've been talking. And he's been working with the design team, it looks like, to come up with a cool new layout for OctoChat. I'm excited. So I'm going to take a look. And let's just scroll down here. So we've got CI running against this branch now, and it's good, but John's broken the build.
Oh,
no. So there are a few failing tests here, so let's dive in and check out the details. So it looks like something's going on with that install lint and test. Maybe it's an audit that's broken. I don't know what's going on here. Let's check it out. So I'm just going to scroll through. So we get streaming logs in Actions as well, which is really nice. And I can see there's an error here coming from semi-standard. Semi-standard is the tool we're using to lint our code. It's performing static analysis of our libraries. And it's complaining about quite a few things. So although this pull request looks really good, I'm sorry, John. We're going to have to change it. No, I'm just kidding. So let's see if this does look really cool. I love the screenshot, but I do want my linting to be nice and green before I merge this in. So let's see if we can fix this. I'm going to switch over to my terminal. And I actually teed up some changes earlier that I hope will address this. So I've got these changes here. I'm going to quickly stage them. So the issues were in the handlers and the model.js files. Let's commit those. I'll just provide a quick commit message here, address the linting errors, and let's push that back to GitHub. All right, sweet. So hopefully now on our pull request, there's my commit, my new commit. And we should see CI running again. We should hopefully start getting some feedback here pretty quickly. We're going to run this again against all 3 versions of Node. So let's check this out. Right, that fixed it. That's great. And then the build is going to kick off again. And when we're running the build, what we're doing is we're essentially productionizing that image for production. So we're only pulling in the production dependencies, and we're gonna bake that and get that ready for delivery. So I just want to make sure that this is green as well. And again, let's speed this up a little bit. Cool. So we got working on 3 versions of Node. The build is running. Lots of green check marks, which I love. It makes me very happy. Yeah, this is all looking good. So I'm going to submit my own review as well now, just to kind of seal the deal. So looks good. Thanks for the pull request, and I'll approve that and we'll submit. And now, with that kind of human intervention as well, and the automated checks, this feels like a really solid change. So I'm going to merge this pull request. And I don't want that branch hanging around, so let's get rid of that branch as well. We don't need that anymore. All right, sweet. So now, let's try and deploy this. So I'm jumping over to my Actions tab again, and my deploy to Amazon ECS has already fired up, we can see. So last time it failed on that configure AWS credential step. Now it's passed. That's because we provided our secrets. So we can now authenticate with AWS. We've logged into Elastic Container Registry, and now we have to build, tag, and push it again. We're tagging it with a different tag here, so we can push it to ECR. So then when we have pushed this to ECR, that kind of will complete the continuous delivery part of our workflow. So we've created an artifact that represents our release, and we've delivered that to the cloud. So that has completed successfully. We've dynamically kind of generated or rendered a task definition that will pull in that artifact from ECR and actually update the service. And now our last step here is to deploy this new task definition to the existing ECS cluster. So this is all going to, as I said, it's all being run by the code that AWS has released. And our action is going to wait until this completes. Let's just dive into kind of the background here and see what's going on over in ECS. So here's our OctoChat cluster, and here are the tasks that's running. And there are 2 tasks currently. I don't know if you can see the version 17 and the version 18. But ECS is cleverly handling this for us. 17 is the old version, and ECS is going to wait for kind of existing connections to be drained, and it's going to start serving from 18 in the meantime, and Actions is going to wait until all of that is done. So this can take a few minutes sometimes. We're going to fast forward, and it's done. So the deployment completed successfully, and why don't we go check this out in production. So here's our production app again, running in octochat.dev. I'm going to log back in with my GitHub account, and here is the cool new UI. It looks pretty awesome. I'm going to go and send John a message, I think, just to let him know how it went. And so here's our cool new UI. I mean, before it was kind of like this weird inbox and sent items thing, felt pretty 90s. And now we've got this really slick kind of iMessage looking application that's looking solid. So I'm going to send John a little reply and let him know how the demo went. Hey, John. All good. Thanks, I think. I think we might need to fix the UX because I want to hit that green button to send my message, and that will log me out. We can do that later. All right, sweet. So that's our deployment. So just to recap, so we added 2 automated processes to our repository. We added a continuous integration workflow, and then we added a continuous delivery and deployment workflow using existing building blocks from the GitHub ecosystem. And I would just like to mention this repo that I demoed today is entirely open source at this URL. That includes the application code, but you might be more interested in the workflows. Those are all open source, so feel free to go and check it out, fork it, copy it, reuse it. As well, I should mention that the AWS actions that have been released are also open source. So feel free to use this in your own projects. I said I had another demo as well, so I'm going to quickly do that too, if that's OK. I mentioned that you can kind of do stuff as well as kind of a CI/CD kind of pattern. Actions, as we've seen, has great primitives for doing that. But Actions can really be used to automate kind of any part of your workflow on GitHub. You might think of it as a way to script your repositories, sort of like an if this, then that for GitHub. It allows you to run your code that lives in GitHub. You can now run your code on GitHub, and that code can do pretty much anything. So just some examples. So you could script or automate something to validate that a repository contains the correct license when that repository becomes public. You might, if you're running an organization with a lot of members, when a new person onboards to your organization, you could automatically create an issue with a task list to welcome that new team member and help them get started. Or you could set up a workflow when you're releasing a new version of your software to automatically distribute release notes to some mailing lists. So the opportunities are pretty vast and endless, and that's just the beginning of the list. So we wanted to take a look at a slightly different approach of something else you can do to automate your workflow using GitHub Actions. So let's dig into this quick. So we have this pretty nifty calculator app. It's really exciting. That has been developed, again, using Node.js. And here it is running in production. It has pretty much everything you could ever want in a calculator, except when I looked at it, I felt like it could really benefit from a factorial function. I love factorials. So I really want to add a factorial function to this calculator. So I decided to go and open an issue in the repository to describe this new feature that I'd like to have. I think it would be really cool. And I took a quick look at the code, and I noticed that there's this controller, and it has these operations already baked in. So it seems like the only thing that we would need to add is just another operation called factorial, and I think that would be, that would work. So I opened this a little bit ago, but John has also chimed in. Thank you, John. And he's noted that, there might be a bit more work to do. We're also going to have to modify the front end. We might need to bring in the design team. It might be a bit more work than I perhaps first realized. So I don't know if he's right, but he might be. I think what would be smart, though, before we commit to taking on this feature, is maybe we could consult the rest of the team. So our team is distributed. I'd like to give them the opportunity to kind of weigh in and kind of help us inform how much work is involved here. And we can kind of do that with GitHub Actions, too. I think we could maybe render some kind of poll within the issue. Polls aren't a native feature of GitHub, but we can kind of achieve this through GitHub, render a poll and get everyone to vote, and then once everyone's votes are in, we'll kind of lock in the size of this issue. Okay, so let's see if we can do that with Actions. So I'm back here on the Actions tab again, and this time I'm going to create a new workflow, but this time I'm going to set it up myself. I'm not going to use one of the GitHub templates. I'm going to make a few edits again to this YAML file. I think a sensible name for this YAML file would be polls.yaml, so that's what I'm going to call it. And I'm going to change the name of this workflow to match, so we'll call it polls. And this time, instead of saying on every push to the repo, what I want to do is respond to whenever any issues are created. So I'm going to say on issues, and I'm going to narrow that down a little bit further so that my polls are only generated when an issue is first opened or edited. So the way I can do that is there's this types filter that says only run on these types of issue events. So I'm saying only run it on an issue opened or edited event. I'm going to edit this on line 8 here. I'm going to edit the ID just for kind of cosmetic reasons. I like that stuff, so I'm going to call it polls. It's going to run on Ubuntu, which I'm fine with. And all of this stuff here that GitHub has recommended for us. In my case is kind of not typical, so I'm going to just remove that and start with a blank slate. So we only actually need one step to achieve what I'm trying to achieve here. And we can also pull in an existing piece of work, which John has written. So I'm going to reference the work that he's written via his repository where it's published, which is in imjohnbo/gh pollsbot action. And then I'm going to say @master, which some people might frown on. We could use a tag instead of master, but I'm just going to roll with that for now. And so this is referencing code that John has published, and I'm able to pull that into my workflow and use that, and it's been published in such a way that it will run on Actions. And we can talk about that more if anyone's interested in how to do that. I need to send in a couple of environment variables. First one is this GitHub token, and I'm going to access this via secrets. This token is the only token that's different in that we don't need to define this ourselves in our repository. GitHub will dynamically generate that for us, and this token is scoped just to this repo. So this means that this step in my workflow will have access to my repository, but it's not going to have access to anything else in my repository, and it can only do certain things within the repo. So it's scoped to a very specific kind of use case. So just to review, we're going to run this whenever an issue is opened or edited. John's written some code which we're going to pull in, and we're going to be able to authenticate with this GitHub token, which means we can use the GitHub API and do all kinds of cool stuff. And if you've used anything like GH Polls or the Polls Probot app, then this might look familiar to you. We're kind of reusing a lot of the same stuff. I guess the key difference is that this is running on Actions and isn't hosted on some other cloud. So let's go ahead and commit that. And now that that is committed, let's head back to our original issue over here. So I'm gonna go ahead and edit this issue now to try and render this poll so that our team can chime in on the size of this issue. So I'm gonna come down here, I'm gonna edit this issue, I'm just gonna kind of try and get the attention of the team and just say, hey everyone, can we all please estimate the size of this issue? And I'm now going to render my poll, and the way I do that is just with a /polls command, which John's code will kind of look for that. And we're just going to pass in the options for our poll as kind of parameters to that command. So I want 4 options: small, medium, large, and extra large, just so that we have some consistency in the way that everyone votes. So that should trigger off something over here in Actions. So we see this, this polls workflow is now running for us. It's got to do a little bit of setup before it can really get going here, just to provision the hardware that it needs to run on. And that completed successfully in response to the issue edited event in this case. So let's jump back to our issue. And lo and behold, we have a beautiful generated poll embedded in our issue. So I'm going to cast my vote, as I'm also a member of the team. And I do still think this is a pretty easy thing, so I am going to say this is a small task. But let's just wait for everyone else to vote as well. It's a distributed team, so we may have to wait a few minutes. Let's just reload the page. Okay, everyone has voted, which is nice. And it looks like I've been pretty significantly outvoted by the team. Everyone disagrees with me, which is fine. It's not the first time. And everyone is saying, you know what, it's a pretty big, there's a lot more work here involved than perhaps I had perceived, so fair enough. I'll go with the consensus here. We'll lock this in, and we'll say this is a large task, so I am going to reflect that by tagging it with the large label. So we've just incorporated like a new automated process into our development team. I think that being able to accurately estimate and being able to incorporate lots of different perspectives is really, really important to like a high-performing and productive and fast-moving development team. So we were able to accomplish this with GitHub Actions. And in case you are interested in creating a similar piece of work, I recommend checking out this Actions Toolkit, which is an open source toolkit to get you started. As well, come and chat to John and I. We've created quite a few of these things at this point. And if you create something that you would love to share with the community that you think other people could also benefit from, then we are curating useful actions in our marketplace. And there's a self-service way to publish those in the marketplace, and I would encourage you to consider doing that as well. And just to summarize then, there's a vast array of events available on GitHub. CI/CD primitives are solid, and that is a kind of first-class citizen of what we want to do with actions. But there's also this kind of rich opportunity to automate any part of your workflow, really, using events on GitHub. As well, we have what is called our repository dispatch event, which will allow you to trigger events on GitHub from something that happens outside of GitHub. So that could be some change in the environment or some change in an application that's running on production, or it could be the push of an IoT button or someone knocking on your front door, I don't know. But yeah, there's a lot of opportunity. So thanks for listening to the demo and for following along. I am going to hand it back to John.
Great. Thank you so much, Steve, and for approving my PR. I feel good about myself today. So to wrap up, in this talk, we've shown how GitHub Actions can be a central element in your CI/CD strategy, automating your AWS workflows and your manual processes. We hope you're excited to try it out in your own repositories and organizations. Please feel free to find us afterwards down here at the bottom or at the GitHub booth for questions and comments. Thanks very much.